Hi everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a murder hobo player that way overreacts when his actions have consequences. A story about how, quote, gritty realism can ruin a game of Dungeons and Dragons, and much more. But before we get into those, here is Luna to try and get y'all to like and share this video. There we go. Now I think we can get into some D&D horror stories. Pterodactyl D&D player brandishes a knife after getting killed for being a sex pest and a murder hobo. By Reddit user Investigator Top 9225. Okay, this may be the most insane thing to happen in my life, let alone over a tabletop RPG. By my last year of college, I had found my group of D&D buddies pretty early on in college, and we played consistently. The a-hole in this story was a new addition to our group, and was initially kind of a ride-the-line type of player who was quick to violence and a bit of a sex fiend. But again, he always kind of rode the line without crossing it. We also played at his house. That is, until about a year ago, when we started up our current campaign. It is a classic, post-apocalyptic campaign, but with fire zombies and demons taking over. The aforementioned player just, quote, discovered drinking and started getting wasted at our sessions. He was playing as a hobgoblin warlock and got more and more belligerent with NPCs until he got himself killed by an inquisitor that he tried to threaten with his eldritch powers. He got pretty pissed off and tried to argue with the DM about why he should have survived. He ended up leaving for a couple of sessions before coming back. Actions meet consequences. Though I wonder if the group still played at this player's house while said player was out for those few sessions. So he rolls up a new character, a Terrafolk barbarian. He was now a straight up murder hobo who worshipped Khorne and Slaanesh from Warhammer, even though this was a Dungeons and Dragons game. He ended up getting revenge on the Inquisitor who killed his last character before eating his flesh. Dang, I almost cut myself on that edge. Also, wouldn't his new character killing the character that killed his old character be metagaming? His next act of murder was of a noblewoman who refused to allow us to enter the keep with our weapons. So he made a scene and started hacking and slashing when the guards tried to intervene. This forced our party to end up fleeing the town as fugitives, so we threatened to kill him if he does this in the elf capital, our next destination. When we get there, he somewhat tones down his belligerent behavior. But when we get to a bar, his character is drunk, and so is he, the player. And I mean really drunk. More so than we had ever seen him. A barmaid came and told our party that we were cut off, so the Terrafolk barbarian said,
"No, I want more beer, damn it."
She still refused, so he randomly accused her of being a spy for the BBEG. That doesn't make any sense. You would think that if she was a spy, she would want the party to get more drunk to make them weaker, or to get more information out of them. She then told him to get the hell out before I call the guards. He then, randomly, gets creepy and says,
"You're kinda sexy. I bet you get a lot of guys in here who just can't control themselves around you. What's your body count?"
She then calls the guards, and the DM, once again, warns him and says to leave or there could be consequences. He disregards DM again and says,
"I grab the barmaid's pants and slip my hand down and start rubbing."
DM cuts him off and has the guards rush in immediately and surround him. He once again tells him, now out of game, that this is his last chance to leave the bar in peace. Something tells me he chose poorly. He then got pissy and said,
"Stop railroading me."
And then the DM said, "It's not railroading, bro. Your character chose to put himself in this situation. Now take the L and go." And then the player said,
"How many guards are there? Like 4? 6 at the most? We can take them." I activate Barbarian Rage and swing my axe at the first one to approach me.
I then said, "Well, the pterosaur is dead. Let's bounce," which enraged him. He started calling us cowards and accused us of metagaming. How is that metagaming? The party already told his character not to cause trouble. Them leaving him to his own fate makes sense. And then made the absurd claim that we were, quote, not allowed to flee if he wants to stay and fight. He claimed this was a rule and seemed to genuinely believe it. I guess that's why he thought he could win this fight, despite DM's warnings. Well, DM obviously let us flee, and the guards made short work of the sexpest of a pterosaur. There was a moment of awkward silence as the player started seething and then just said,
"F you. F you. This is the second effing character of mine that you killed, a-hole."
DM then said, "Stop being a baby. I gave you like so many warnings, it's crazy." The player then screamed in DM's face,
"You tricked me into this."
Tricked him how? By putting a female NPC in front of him? Like DM said, he gave him multiple warnings in and out of game. DM then got up, got stern, and said, "Look, actions have consequences." The player then said,
"What a vapid statement. Actions have consequences. What the F does that even mean?"
He then stormed out and then came back into the living room where we were playing with a knife. Well, that escalated quickly. We all got up and were like, WTF, as he started pointing it at the DM and brandishing it while saying,
"What? Like you said, actions have consequences. You decided to be a dick. What if the consequence was you get stabbed today? See how effing stupid you sound?"
Well, there is only one person here being stupid, and it isn't the Dungeon Master. DM just backed up and said, "Look, we're leaving. You need help." The lunatic then lowered the knife and said,
"Oh, F off. You know I'm not really going to effing stab you. I'm just trying to prove a point."
But we all just left promptly. And that was probably the best decision they could make. Drunk guy plus knife does not equal anything good. So we left and never came back. He tried to apologize and blame the booze, even though we could tell he was making no efforts to stop drinking. We did not let him back to play with us, and avoided him in general. He eventually sort of gave up, and we just didn't see him again. So yeah, that might have been the craziest thing to happen to me in D&D or in real life. Yeah, I'd say that would probably be at the top of my list of crazy things to happen during a game of Dungeons & Dragons. That player had nobody to blame but himself. Now, could the DM have not killed his character and just had him be arrested or something? Sure. But like OP said, this player was given multiple warnings by the DM, and even the players, after his first murder-hobo action in the previous town. Now, I am sure that most of us have done some stupid things when we were young and started drinking. But even then, threatening people with a knife kinda goes beyond the pale, and I can understand why the group never played with this player again. That is way overstepping a boundary. Though, what do you guys think on this one? Was kicking him for good the right call? Or do you think OP and his group should have given this player a second chance? I'd love to hear your opinions. But with that said, let's move on to the next post. Quote, "Gritty realism is becoming code for bad D&D to me," by Reddit user Cornholio8675. So this has been kind of an overarching problem for me, trying to find a regular D&D group online. I've played a bunch of Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, and even Paranoia. I have no issues with a challenging game, or even a game where death is frequent. Too easy is just as boring as too hard, and D&D does tend to skew to easy. Well, that all really depends on the Dungeon Master, and how good they are at balancing encounters, but I digress. That being said, I've been trying to find a regular group of players online, as I really miss tabletop RPGs when I don't have a group. Recently, I moved very far from home, and my forever DM has taken 3 jobs trying to get a career as a writer off the ground, so no time for D&D anymore. I've noticed that just about every group I find online that isn't for pay has, quote, "gritty realism" as one of the campaign's features. I've had bad experiences with almost every one of these I've tried. It seems to be people who think that they can, quote, "fix D&D," and the games always wind up slow, tedious, feel unfair, and are full of high player turnover. Well, our story begins with being asked by a friend of a friend to join their group. I had played a different tabletop RPG with the DM, and he was fun as a player. Session 0 goes off well, and it sounds like a rules as written standard D&D campaign. Joy. Well, a few months go by, and I've taken note of a few trends that I can't unsee. First off, our DM rolls a fantastical amount of crits. It had become a bit of a running gag at the table. Second, my AC-based character, a 22 AC monk, seems to be eating almost every attack, and the damage is actually quite high, usually about 2/3 of my base hit points. As such, there's a trend of whoever makes it into melee first goes down, usually in the first or second round of combat. No characters have died though, and dice do sometimes do very funny things. We end up having to long rest after just about every fight, and I think we didn't long rest only twice in a few months of play. There also seems to be something going on with control spells and stealth. Every enemy spots stealthing characters every time. Stun Punch, Hold Person, Command, and AoE spells like Fireball are resisted 100% of the time. Every time our wizard tries to scout with his Hawk Familiar, it gets spotted, shot at, and every enemy in the area goes into, quote, ambush mode. Now, like OP said, dice can sometimes just not be in your favor, but every time, something ain't mathing right here. Finally, I private call the DM after the game. After a long enough period of time, I started to tally attacks, crits, hits and misses. Enemies hit at a rate of 95%, regardless of player character AC. The player characters are averaging 2 crits a session. The DM is averaging 8, and once it went as high as 14. Stealth has never worked on anything, and neither has a single control spell. Every combat is a dull DPS race, and ends the same way. One player character is always down by the time the party kills the bad guys. It doesn't matter if it's goblins or a big bad. Yeah, something really seems fishy here. Well, you guessed it. D&D is too easy and too much of a power fantasy. We are playing with homebrewed, gritty realism rules. Every enemy has pack tactics or other abilities that allow forever advantage, and monster stat blocks are being buffed so that things have a plus to hit in the teens, basically outscaling the player characters with the highest AC at all times. Control spells trivialize the game, so they are, quote, really hard to pull off. And the Dungeon Master has been fudging rolls against them so that combats are more fun. And apparently, really hard means never. Nobody was ever made aware of any of this, and I just had to figure it out on my own. Needless to say, this is absolutely killing my interest in the game. Yeah, I would say that would kill my interest in the game as well. As far as OP knew, they were just playing raw D&D, and at no point did the DM let them know that he was putting them on hard mode. Now, I can understand making things a bit harder, but making things the way the DM did, to basically make it almost impossible for certain things to work, and making combat a slog to get through, just makes things not fun. D&D is supposed to be a bit of a power fantasy, while making a story together. And it just sounds like this DM wanted to, quote, fix D&D, but overshot it a bit. I would say to talk to the DM about this, and how it's making the game not fun. Maybe he will scale things back to reasonable levels, and y'all can keep playing. Though if not, then I would consider finding another game elsewhere. As, say it with me, no D&D is better than bad D&D. Let's move on to the next post. I suspect a player in my party is cheating. By Reddit user Rodano. So, I'm a dungeon master of a homebrew campaign I've been running for a couple of weeks. Everything's going great, and aside from a couple disagreements, it's been very smooth. My issue is that I feel that one of the players is cheating or lying about their roles or abilities. I have 5 players, and all of which have a physical copy of their character sheet, which I asked them to use at the beginning. However, many have now resulted in using D&D Beyond. The player always brings their laptop just for their character sheet, supposedly. However, they often make rolls before saying what their action is, as well as saying that they can do things that are very not true. They constantly defend themselves, however, by saying,
"But I'm a DM. I know the rules. I've watched loads of videos."
On top of this, they frequently stand up and glance over my board. I've repeatedly told them to sit down, but I'm hit with excuses like,
"I need to stretch,"
or,
"But I'm not looking at your board."
It's getting very tiresome, having them lie and deny roles, and I've had to constantly check to see if they're telling the truth. It's taking the fun out of it for myself and the party, and I was wondering how I should handle it. I am open to kicking them out should it continue, but I'd prefer to handle it another way first. FYI, they make digital rolls on their laptop, so we cannot see unless we get up to look. Thanks. Well, first, I would make it a requirement that all players use physical dice, since it sounds like everyone is playing in person. I mean, honestly, it strikes me kinda odd that a player would prefer to use digital dice when playing in person instead of using physical dice, as I have found most people like physical dice over digital. It just adds that much more enjoyment while playing a tabletop RPG. Second, the next time they roll without being told to roll first, tell them that it doesn't count unless you ask them for it. This should be a rule for every table in my opinion. And lastly, I can understand that having a character sheet on a program like D&D Beyond can make tracking things be easier, as you don't have to constantly erase things or cross them out with a pen. Though I would make it a requirement that you also have access to those sheets, so that you can tell whether he's lying about stuff in regards to said sheet. Then, after all of this, if the behavior continues, then it would be time to consider kicking him. Though, those are just my thoughts. What do you all think? But with that said, let's move on to today's final story. My manipulative player rage quit after being told he couldn't cheat. By Reddit user Gramboff. I had a player who was new to D&D, as this was his first game. He was good and trying to learn at first, but he quickly showed his bad side. The party stopped at a blacksmith to get some items, and problem player, who I will now call PP. I'm sorry, I'm a child. Said it would be cool if he could get a rusty sword that would give people tetanus. I said okay and tried to make it balanced, but he wouldn't let it be balanced. When I tried to give it a con, he said,
"Shouldn't D&D be about being creative? Just let me have this one thing."
I caved and let him keep it. He kept using that excuse that I wasn't letting him be creative over and over so he could blatantly cheat. Eventually, I stopped letting him do this and forced him to play like everyone else. He was good for a few meetings, but then he tried his biggest cheat yet. He tried to say that he somehow, using an item he didn't have, called the army of some kingdom to kill a boss. When I said no, he blew up, swearing at me and yelling,
"D&D is about telling a story, and you're not letting me tell mine. You're a horrible DM."
He stormed out after that and stopped showing up. Good riddance, I say. Well, it sounds like the trash took itself out here, but I have to say that OP kinda encouraged this behavior by giving in to this player in the first place. Sure, being creative is part of D&D, and sometimes players can come up with something that they think would be cool, much like this player did. But it's up to the DM to make sure any actions or homebrew items aren't overpowered. OP did let this player have that sword, but when OP tried to make it not super powerful, problem player bitched, and OP relented, thus starting the snowball effect. Though thankfully, OP finally decided to put his foot down and tell him no to that army BS, and then the player left of his own accord. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.